Have you ever felt so deceived that fury overpowered you? That's where I was when my wife's affair partner hissed, "She'll never leave me for you." His arrogance infuriated me, and I determined to make him regret it, beginning at his office. But before I go into the story, please subscribe. I aim to get 1,000 subscribers, and I can only do so with your help. Let's get started. I, 35, have married my wife Jessie, 34, for 8 years. I always thought our relationship was based on trust, love, and mutual respect, but recent events have made me reconsider. I am rethinking practically everything I thought I understood about myself and her. We recently discussed starting a family, and everything indicated we were in a good place. But obviously, I was utterly wrong. My wife is a software salesperson who routinely interacts with clients as part of her job. I don't know the specifics of her employment, but I believe she sells accounting software to banks. She travels extensively over the city to demonstrate the program to other banks, but she gets a good commission and is skilled at her job. I was proud of her, until a phone call revealed that she could be too excellent at her work. A woman called and claimed to be the secretary of one of her clients. She was anxious, and I had to tell her that my wife was not present before she spoke to me. My wife was at work then, and I informed her so. Alarm bells were going off in my head, a strange woman saying she couldn't talk to me with my wife present. But I was also incredibly curious to hear what she had to say. A little part of me now wishes I hadn't indulged her so I could continue living my previous life in ignorance, but the reasonable part of me is relieved that she came forward. She refused to give me her name, but she did say that my wife had been visiting her boss, and she was suspected of cheating. I laughed and said she was a sales representative, which was typical for her. She showcased the software to him and tried to close the transaction. She told me that specific clients were complex and required multiple sessions to be convinced. The secretary informed me that she was aware of this but had not given it much thought at first. She only became suspicious when she saw that my wife would enter his office with her ring on but wouldn't wear it when she left. I did not react to that. It was suspicious behavior. I considered it in several ways, but nothing made sense. I knew some female sales agents leveraged their attractiveness to close deals, and I imagined she might take off her ring to make herself appear available to a customer. That did not work, however, because she refused to wear her ring into his office. She would remove it sooner, most likely before entering the building. My mystery caller noticed my quietness and inquired whether I was all right. I urged her to continue, expecting she would drop some extra information to make things sense in my head. There was no such luck. She said her employer had arranged 3 to 4 weekly meetings with her. They would occasionally go out to lunch. I felt conflicted. This seemed like part of winning over a particularly indecisive and potentially large client, but the ring remained on my mind. I could only think of one reason she would take it off when alone with him in his office, which made me feel horrible. I thanked her for sharing the information and asked if she could tell me who her supervisor was. She was apprehensive at first and told me he could make things extremely difficult for her if he found out what she had told me. I agreed not to tell anyone where I had heard this. I informed her that I appreciated her acts and would keep her safe. She sounded relieved and mentioned her boss's name. I wanted to face my wife and find out whether this was real, but I only had the words of a woman I had never met. I decided to bring it up anyhow and monitor her reaction attentively. She was in her usual cheery mood when she arrived home that day. She kissed me, asked about my day, and told me about her own. I tried to remain calm throughout it all, but I could not get her image with the other guy out of my head. When she started telling me about a client who was finally embracing the software, I let go. The same way you convinced Greg? When I said that, she was fishing something out of her purse and she froze. I still waited for her to say something. I could almost see the wheels working in her mind. She must have been trying to remember if she had ever mentioned him to me. I took her out of her agony. I told her I knew about Greg. I said I had the word of a private investigator who had spoken with his co-workers. To her credit, she folded promptly. Her expression fell and she dropped into a chair. She hid her hands in her face, claiming she had never intended it to happen. It could have been a better error. She referred to the repeated behavior that ended her 8-year marriage as a mistake. I took a deep breath and asked her how long this had been happening. She paused before informing me it had been several months. I asked her the question since the secretary called. Why did you remove your ring when you entered his office? She appeared as if she had seen a ghost. She undoubtedly wondered how I knew that. She paused long before admitting. He didn't like to with the ring on. She couldn't face my gaze. She couldn't force herself to finish her sentence, but it was clear what the missing word was. I felt nauseous. She'd already accepted it, but hearing it made it feel even more genuine. I saw the future we had planned together break apart in front of me. She begged for my pardon. She continued saying she'd do anything to mend it. She'd stop seeing him, leave her job, anything. She kept saying it as if repairing what she had destroyed was so simple. I have not walked out yet. I'm still in our apartment with her sleeping soundly next to me, wondering what I will do. 8 years is a long time to throw away, yet it's been just 2 days, and my pain and anger haven't subsided. My mind is settling on ending the relationship as much as it will hurt. The decision was much easier to make after I confronted her affair partner. I saw Greg's details on LinkedIn and obtained his contact information. I wrote him a message in which I made up gibberish about an opportunity and was able to arrange a meeting with him. As I paused outside his office door, I spotted the secretary sitting at her desk. She recognized me because she was trying hard not to look at me. I knew she was anxious about being found out, so I tried not to stare at her. When he eventually let me in, I realized he had flamboyant tastes. His office was decorated with faux leather seats, every credential he had ever received, a collection of strange artsy objects, and an oversized desk. I couldn't look at that desk without wondering what he would have done with Jessie there. When I stepped in, he stood up and gave me his hand. I didn't take it and said, "I'm Jessie's husband." His grin faded for a second before he sat back down. I did not take a seat. I told him I was familiar with their meetings and lunches. I had photographs taken by a PI. I inquired whether he had anything to say about himself. He had something to say. With a sneer, he claimed Jessie was an adult who made her own decision. He stated they'd had lengthy discussions regarding our relationship and argued that she was happier with him than with me. "She'll never leave me for you," he continued. He went on about how she felt imprisoned in her marriage and wasn't sure whether she wanted children yet, but didn't know how to express it. She was bored with me and wanted to leave. That saddened me, and it was the moment I determined my relationship was over. The betrayal was too severe to repair. I did not say anything to Greg. I turned and left his office, but the entire time I was plotting ways to get back at them both. I was too hurt to let them go away. When I went home that day, I told my wife I was willing to forgive her on one condition. She emailed Greg's office outlining the nature of their relationship. She was outraged and puzzled. I did not dispute with her. I informed her I would phone a lawyer in the morning to draw up divorce papers. I could see she was torn. She didn't want a divorce, but she also didn't want to embarrass herself and her affair partner simultaneously. She spent the next 30 minutes pleading for an alternative, but I reminded her that she had promised to do anything. She tried every strategy she could think of to escape it, but I remained firm. I fed her bullshit about how that was the only way I could be sure of her love and begin to forgive her. She eventually consented, but unwillingly and with tears. That night, I sat and watched as she wrote an email to his office admitting her affair. I ensured she didn't overlook anything, the meals, the travels, and his office on company time. How long had this been going on? She presented it several times, and I suggested changes I wanted her to make. She sent out the email once, and I was delighted with it. She felt unhappy about revealing her acts because she knew it could also be the end of her career. I persuaded her it was the only way to move forward as a marriage. She wasn't happy about it, but she appeared to accept it. I was just relieved she was facing some repercussions for her actions. The next day, she appeared uncomfortable and distracted, frequently checking her phone. Clearly, she was waiting for Greg to call and yell at her for ruining his job. The call finally arrived the next day. Greg raged and hurled abuses at her. My wife just cried and tried to explain that she was attempting to repair our relationship and that this was the only option. I can't tell you how pleased that call made me. Her tears did not impact me. I had finished caring for her. Instead, I was glad to see her finally face the repercussions of her behavior. Seeing Greg in distress was the actual punishment, especially after his arrogance in our meeting. I wanted to grab my phone and brag, but I still needed to finish. Greg informed her that he had been suspended while an investigation was ongoing, and he promised to ensure that she also lost her job. She broke down sobbing and begged him not to do it, but he was enraged. I just stood there watching her cry. When the call finished, she ran to me, sobbing over perhaps losing her job. I informed her that we had both anticipated this conclusion and could move forward together. Greg fulfilled his pledge. He reported her to her employer, just like she had done to him. Unlike Greg, her investigation was conducted quickly, and she was fired nearly immediately. She was devastated. I soothed her again, assuring her that everything was for the best and that our connection had strengthened. I wasn't sure if she believed it or was just glad to have an excuse for her behavior. I stayed with Jessie after she lost her job. She relied on me more than ever. I led her to believe we were moving toward reconciliation, promising to rebuild. The fact was, I was enjoying her hope and watching her pull herself together before pulling everything down. Meanwhile, I kept track of Greg. About a month after receiving the email, he lost his job. He did not call Jessie this time. I found out on LinkedIn that he had changed his status to freelance consulting, which indicates that he was unemployed. His reputation seemed to follow him as his LinkedIn connections dwindled daily. It appears that he was having trouble getting work. When I confirmed Greg's termination, I made my move. Just as Jessie appeared to be recuperating from her job loss, I informed her that I wanted a divorce. She was outraged initially, yelling at me and calling me every name under the sun. She claimed she had sacrificed her job for me. I corrected her. She had not given anything up for me or thrown everything away herself. If her career had been that important, she would not have been putting out for clients on company time. I expected her to be angry since I fooled her into losing her job and was still divorcing her, but her rage subsided immediately. She began pleading, saying she would have nothing left if I left her. I informed her that everything she had lost resulted from her behavior and that it was all her fault, not mine. She implored me to rethink, promising to do whatever to save our marriage. I informed her that there was nothing left to save. As far as I was concerned, there had been nothing to save since I learned of her betrayal. Finally, I admitted that I had never forgiven her. I only wanted her to feel the misery she had caused me. As I handed her the divorce papers, I reminded her of what Greg had told me, how she felt stuck in our marriage, was unprepared for children, and was bored with me. The betrayal was too deep for forgiveness. She had no response. She sobbed and pleaded. The divorce went relatively well for me. Jessie earned well before losing her job, so I avoided paying alimony. I originally hated her decision to keep the apartment, but in retrospect it was a blessing because I couldn't afford rent on a single wage anyway. Jessie struggled to find a new job. In sales, trust between clients and employers is essential, and her reputation was damaged. Sales is a trust-based industry, and no one wants to trust a salesperson with a history of sleeping with clients. The story did not end with the divorce, however. Greg began texting me just a few days after I discovered he had lost his job. At first, his texts were all angry accusations accusing me of destroying his life. However, they eventually evolved into open threats. While I didn't expect him to show up at my house, I wasn't taking any chances. He was a desperate man who had lost everything and was acting out. I replied by alerting him that I had passed his texts to my lawyer and was in the process of filing a restraining order. I also explained that I had forwarded copies of his threats to local authorities as a precaution. His tone altered almost quickly. He sent a flurry of apologetic messages, stressing that he was only venting and that nothing he said was profound. I told him I was not interested in his excuses. Whether he was venting or not, his actions were wrong, and I made it clear that my counsel and I would continue to take threats seriously. I have yet to hear from Greg again. Ultimately, I walked away from the entire mess, satisfied with the result. Both Jessie and Greg received what they deserved. Jessie violated our marriage, and Greg insulted me, believing he was untouchable. They both learned their lesson. I refuse to feel guilty about it. One day, I'll be wholly past this. Until then, I know I made the proper decision to walk away. That's all for today's video. If you enjoyed it, please give it a thumbs up and leave your opinions in the comments section below. I'd love your thoughts. If you haven't already done so, subscribe and click the notification bell to ensure you never miss an update. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next one.